Charles Manson died today. I have a strange thing with Charles Manson. If you're a longtime listener to the podcast, you've heard my Charles Manson story about the guy I met years ago when I was traveling who sort of inadvertently spent some time with the Mansons and got a little caught up in some of their shenanigans. And Ed, forget Ed's last name. But he's in the books about the Mansons. Some people claim he was a fellow traveler or whatever. You can go back into the archives and find that. It's one of the first ROMA episodes. Anyway, my thing about Charles Manson is that I feel like, first of all, it's not clear that he ever killed anyone, he himself. So the fact that he was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to murder and all that, yeah, I guess. But if you tell someone to go kill someone and they do it, I mean, I guess it is conspiracy, technically, illegally. But it's kind of strange because there's a lot of people telling a lot of other people to do stupid shit, and they rarely get prosecuted for it, even when the person listening to the instructions actually goes and does the stupid shit. I'm in this weird position where I'm almost defending Charles Manson. I'm not really defending him. Obviously, he was a fucking lunatic. Obviously, I would not want to hang out with him. I would not pick him up if he were hitchhiking. I would not introduce him to my little sister. I'm not really defending Charles Manson, but I do think that the cultural response to Charles Manson has been disingenuous for a couple of reasons. First reason I alluded to, he didn't actually kill anyone himself. I know he was convicted of 2 murders of a stuntman or something, but there was never, as far as I know, there was no compelling evidence. It was just they were charges that were piled on to make sure he never got parole or never got out of prison. And I'm no expert. I don't mean to present myself as some definitive expert on Charles Manson, but because of this guy, Ed, that I met in Alaska, I sort of paid attention to it over the years, the case and all that. So I just thought it was interesting. He never killed anyone, as far as I know, directly. He was himself a victim of a very fucked up American culture. His mother was a prostitute, very poor, desperate, living in the streets. He, basically was a feral child, was in and out of prison as a kid, was obviously very highly intelligent, but that intelligence was never respected or shaped, educated, nourished in any healthy way. He was left to fend for himself. So he became a bit of a wolf. He became a survivor. He became dangerous. Well, that's what happens when you don't take care of people. That's one of the things that can happen. So I feel like when Charles Manson said in court, you people are all afraid of me, but I'm just a mirror. What you see is yourselves. He had a point. The other thing that I think is troubling about the cultural reaction to Charles Manson, the fact that here we are 50 some years later, he just died. We're talking about him, but even before he died, people were talking about him. He's this very compelling figure in American popular culture. And I think that one of the reasons he's so compelling is that he is useful in furthering the dominant narrative, which is that hippies are dangerous, that thinking outside the box is dangerous unless, you're thinking of a new way to sell fucking widgets, which isn't really outside the box. It's well within the box. But questioning the central principles and values of the culture is very threatening to the culture. And so, on one hand, the whole 60s movement is dismissed as it didn't add up to anything. It was just a waste of time. It was a bunch of dirty, fucking smelly hippies. They didn't know what they were doing. And look at it now. They're all, the communes all failed and blah, blah, blah. In the last episode, I talked about that a little in the intro, which is totally wrong. So many of the innovative ways of thinking and subjects that people were thinking about, material people were developing in the 60s, permeates the decade since then. So to call that decade a waste of time is to betray an incredible historical ignorance. But this idea that hippies are dangerous, so they're dismissed as ineffective and useless on one hand, and then as dangerous on the other hand. And Charles Manson is one of the few examples you can really think of, of hippies who went nuts and killed people. And you could also say he wasn't really a hippie anyway. He just pretended to be. He was a fucking Nazi who dressed up in hippie clothes. And the women who he sent to do these killings were homeless girls who were kicked out of their homes, most of them, by cruel authoritarian parents who couldn't communicate with them, and they drifted to San Francisco, and this guy drove around in his van and picked them up and offered them attention and love and sex and drugs and a place to crash. And that's how he recruited his family, in quotes. So in so many ways, Charles Manson is a reflection of the failures of American society. And what American society does then is demonizes him and makes him this monster who can't be acknowledged as a human being who came from a certain place and did things with a certain logic, because that would shine light then on the failures of the society. It's much like the Unabomber. I mean, the Unabomber, this horrible, okay, he killed people. He killed innocent people. He blew off the hands of innocent people. True. But he also was very, very smart and said some shit that made a lot of sense about where the world was going. And now, here we are further down the road, and he's more right than ever. And the thing is, even acknowledging that Charles Manson was an evil hippie who killed or convinced other people to kill whatever it was, 8, 9 people. How many evil businessmen have there been in the last 50 years whose decisions have led to 9 deaths or more? Hundreds, I'm guessing. How many evil military leaders have there been who have given orders to kill innocent people, drop bombs on wedding parties and innocent people standing around who happen to be within 100 feet of some guy that they think is a terrorist leader? So, take out. Yeah, we're going to lose, collateral damage. Those 30 people are going to die, but it's worth it. How many of those decisions have been made in the last 50 years? Hundreds, thousands. I'm talking about just Americans. But they're not demonized. So my point is that, and it's a kind of a trite, obvious point, I suppose, but Charles Manson is a stark example of how the society is like an organism. And when Charles Manson is like a fucking splinter or something that jams up into it. And so what the organism does is it creates scar tissue around this thing to isolate it, to keep it from seeping into the overall organism, to block whatever message this intruder is bringing. And The scar tissue around Charles Manson is the demonization and the sort of silly Halloween-ish narrative that's built up around him. And again, I'm not defending him, and I'm not saying he's even a rational person. I'm just saying the way that the society reacts to him is totally out of proportion to what he was and the actual effect that he had on the society, because of underlying fears of other things. You know, it's like there was no gun control law in California until some Black Panthers showed up at a court. I forget who it was who was having a court appearance, but the Black Panthers showed up. A few cars rolled in with 15 or 20 black dudes in the black leather jackets and the berets and all that, carrying guns openly. And suddenly, Ronald Reagan, who was president of California at the time, within weeks signed a gun control law. You can't carry guns in the open in California. Well, obviously that wasn't about guns. That was about black people with guns. And the reaction against Charles Manson isn't against murder or conspiracy to murder. It's about hippies, LSD, challenges to the basic underlying principles of American culture. So that's what I have to say about Charles Manson.